Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. You are listening to a teaching with Rabbi Joel Rembaum.
All right, here we go. Who wants to read? Don't all jump at once.
Where are we? The Ari Apion's citing Posidonius?
Yes.
Line 9? 79.
79.
Okay, I'll read.
Okay.
I am no less amazed at the proceedings of the authors who supplied him with his materials. I mean Posidonius and Apollonius Molon.
All right, these two guys, you can review if you wish on the second side on page 147, the numbers at the bottom. They're brief biographies. These are two legitimate intellectuals and influencers. The interesting thing is both of them had a role to play, apparently, in shaping the thinking of Cicero, another lover of the Jewish people. But it's just interesting. These really are serious intellectuals who lived in the 1st century BCE. So, they're real people, as opposed to Manetho. We're not sure who he was. We talked about that last time. All right, so this is Posidonius and Apollonius Molon. Okay, good. Continue, Barbara, please.
On the one hand, they charge us with not worshiping the same gods as other people. On the other, they tell lies and invent absurd calumnies about our temple. What's a calumny?
False reports.
Okay.
Is
without showing any consciousness of impiety.
Yes.
Yet to high-minded men, nothing is more disgraceful than a lie of any description. But above all, on the subject of a temple of worldwide fame and commanding sanctity.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's Josephus's comment on these comments that we're about to read, that come from Apion, but Apion, again, is the person who associates them with these thinkers. And, yeah. All right.
And the temple we're talking about is Jewish synagogue.
Yeah, no, the wonder of the temple of worldwide fame was the temple of Herod. Right. Remember, Josephus is writing this in the 90s, 20-some years after the destruction of the temple. He is in Rome in the Flavian court as a court historian, and and a respected person. And but so he's writing this with knowledge, of course, of the destruction of the temple. He was there. No, he was not. He was not in Jerusalem when the temple was destroyed. He was not there. He was in Rome, probably. But of course, he found out from all kinds of sources what had happened. And so, but the point is, at the time when the temple was standing, of course, is when these guys and Apion were that's when they were writing all these things and teaching these things. So the temple was there, and indeed it was a beautiful temple. There's no question about it. All right, continue.
Within this sanctuary, Apion has the effrontery to assert that Jews kept an ass's head, worshipping that animal and deeming it worthy of the deepest reverence. The fact was disclosed, he maintains, on the occasion of the spoliation of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes, when the head made of gold and worth a high price was discovered.
Yes. All right. So there was an ass head, a donkey head, a golden donkey head. That's what the Jews worshiped in the temple, according to this lie, calumny, as he calls it. Right? That's pretty nasty, if you ask me. But you ain't seen, as they say, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Because it's not the equivalent to the golden bull, where the Jews made it despite what God wanted. This is something that's an absolute lie.
That was the first temple, not the second temple, right? This is the second temple. Yeah.
Could it have been a sacrifice? Was the animal there, or you don't think the animal, was it a sacrifice maybe? And he twisted it?
It was a golden one, so therefore it couldn't be a sacrifice.
The golden donkey was an idol.
An idol, okay, not a golden colored, okay.
Who's, according to this, worshipped an ass.
Antisemitism 101.
You got it. Okay, moving on. All right, very good. Else. Thank you, Barbara. 89 and 91. Continue. Somebody. All right, Margaret.
He adds a second story about Greeks, which is a malicious slander upon us from beginning to end, and asserts that Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining, with a table before him laden with a banquet of fish of the sea, beasts of the earth, and birds of the air, at which the poor fellow was gazing in stupefaction.
Wow. Go ahead. Yes.
The king's entry was instantly hailed by him with adoration, as about to procure him profound relief. Falling at the king's knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. The king reassured him and bade him tell him who he was, why he was living there, what was the meaning of his abundant fare. Thereupon, with sighs and tears, the man, in a pitiful tone, told the tale of his distress.
Go ahead.
He said, Appian continues, that he was a Greek, and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. At first, these unlooked-for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Finally, on consulting the attendants who waited upon him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. The practice was repeated by them annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up for a year, and then convey him to a wood where they slew him, sacrificed his body with their customary ritual, partook of his flesh, and while immolating the Greeks, swore an oath of hostility to the Greeks. And on. Okay, the remains of their victim were then thrown into a pit. The man, Appian continues, stated that he had now but a few days left to live, and implored the king out of respect for the gods of Greece to defeat this Jewish plot upon his lifeblood and to deliver him from his miserable predicament.
So this is your first blood libel.
Yeah. Is it really the first?
Yeah.
Is it? Well.
Yeah. I know of no record of blood libel. And this is a sacrifice of a human being. This even goes beyond the Christian versions of these things. Right? This where they're actually eating a human being.
Eating?
That's what it says. Mm-hmm. They took of his flesh.
How long did it supposedly last?
What?
The blood libel affairs.
I don't know. I mean, according to Appian, this was being circulated by Apollonius and Posidonius. In other words, it comes from the 1st century BCE.
Okay.
According to Appian, who lived in the 1st century CE.
Okay.
All right. So, 1st century BCE, this is, according to Appian, floating around. Now, we don't know. I mean, again, Appian is the guy who put all these things together. And he was prone to exaggeration. And we talked about that last time, right? But at the same time, it was there. It was around. Whether these great thinkers were the ones who were generating this, or whether that was a figment of Appion's imagination, we don't know. But it would sound as if it's been floating around for a while. Now, unless Appian made this all up himself in the 1st century CE, but we don't know that. But Josephus is willing to take it at face value.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Tybal.
That whole benefit of the doubt, but is there any chance that either the Posidonius, whom I'm mispronouncing, either Posidonius or Appian, there was another group of people, and that I'm not saying this well, is there any evidence that there might have been another group of people that had these practices, and either the interlocutor or the author, editor, mixed it up and just said it was the Jews, Israelite, Hebrews, whatever?
I have no idea. I don't know. I have not seen, in my reading all about this stuff, nobody has mentioned other similar accounts floating around at that time. So I don't know. I can't answer that question. It's a good question, but I can't answer it. Okay, so I don't know. Okay. I mean, yeah, things have to begin somewhere, But the point is, this is all part of that ongoing, discussion. Remember that we've already seen in Manetho. No, we didn't. We're going to get to Tacitus on this in a minute, right? Which is, and Tacitus, when Tacitus is going to, you'll see, if you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if not, you'll see what I mean. Tacitus, dealing with these things around the year 104, somewhere around there, right after 100 CE. Remember, Tacitus was huge. Appian was a little nothing compared to Tacitus. And once we move into that, and you'll see what he's writing about, that is a biggie. Okay, Barbara.
Just out of curiosity, this has nothing to do exactly with this. When you were studying Hebrew history for your PhD and teaching history, did you teach later, or did you teach this time period? Or I'm just curious whether or not you were involved with learning all this when you were younger.
No.
What history did you teach?
I didn't. No, actually, no. My focus, I studied this period, excuse me, at the seminary. But we were focusing more, we didn't deal with anti-Semitism that much. No, we did not. It was more, what were the Jews doing? And the larger political issues, etc., and the development of Judaism. Okay, so but we didn't deal with this particular topic. It was, I decided that I wanted. Remember, then when I did my graduate work, I was dealing with medieval Jewish criticism of the Christian Bible, of the New Testament. So that put me into contact more with the history of the anti-Semitic tendencies in the Middle Ages.
Okay, that's right. That's what I thought. I thought this would
have my interest, and then I began moving back in time, and found these sources. I wasn't the original, believe me, person, not far from the first person reading them. But I was reading these things. Obviously, I saw the arguments against the Jews in the Christian Bible, which we're going to get to later, and some of the church fathers. But I moved even further back when I wanted to teach this class. So eventually I put it all together, and I've been reworking it since. adding more things in, getting more information. Even in my preparation for you, I learned new things that I didn't know before. I'll share some of them with you in a moment. So that's the answer to that.
Thank you. I just was not clear completely on. I knew you've done a lot of history in your lifetime. That was just where you taught up at UJ, and thank you, because I'm enjoying what you're talking about here.
Well, I don't want you to enjoy it too much.
But it's learning. I'm learning.
I understand. All right, we got it now, and we're moving to Tacitus. All right. So Tacitus was born in 56 CE and died. Yeah, this is all CE, and died in around 120. All right, he was an orator and a public official, but also a historian, and he wrote a history of the Roman Empire, his histories it's called, and it covered the Roman Empire from 69 to 96 of the Common Era. All right, he died in 120. He was also a member of the Flavian court. Okay, so he may or may not have bumped into Josephus. Josephus died, we're not sure, he died around 100. Okay, so he's about a generation older than Tacitus. But that's very likely that they knew one another. But Josephus wrote his Against Appian about 10 years before Tacitus wrote his histories, the part of his histories when this old discussion of Judaism came up. But you see the timing of it, 69 to 96, includes the destruction of Jerusalem. And the dealings with the Jews that were part of Tacitus' histories falls right into that time frame. And especially because the Flavians were the ones who destroyed Jerusalem, and he ended up in the court of that family, of that dynasty, made it all the more important for him. So Josephus was not responding to him at all when Josephus wrote Against Appian. Clearly, as you will see, Tacitus absorbed these things, whether he got them from Appian or other sources. I don't know. I've seen nobody been able to figure that one out. All right, but I see your hand, Errol. Just a second, okay? But you're going to see. I mean, I will summarize for you a section that precedes what we are going to read, that has a description of how the Jewish people came about. And as you will see, embedded in there is some neutral statements or even a positive one. All right, keep that in mind. There are elements of what he writes, not only here, but this is only, what we're reading is only a slice of the totality of what he wrote about the Jews. There's a lot more. But relative to the whole history, no, it's a small segment. But because the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, was a significant moment in the history of Rome, but particularly in the history of that dynasty, who were the ones responsible for it. So the magnifying glass on that was used because of that significance. But what we're reading is only a little part of what Tacitus wrote. But the tone of it, you'll understand, is significant. Because
he had to have been brilliant.
Wait, excuse me. Let me finish. The point is that there are scholars who have tried to play up the other statements of his, the more quasi-positive ones, to make the point that Well, he was a historian, he had information, and so he's just basically reporting from the sources he had. On the other hand, as you will see from what we're going to read, the quality and quantity of the statements that he makes about the Jews, the negative statements, far exceeds that of the less pointed, less anti-Semitic statements. And that's a general consensus. Okay, I'm just mentioning this because there are those who said, it wasn't so bad. It's bad, but not that bad. But I'm of the school of thought that says, no, it was bad. It was really bad. I mean, he included the other things, yes, because he was a historian. And so he, fills in all the facts. But you'll read it and see, and what certain words he uses and certain introductory statements he makes it clear that he did not like the Jews. All right, so we have hands. I think Errol had a hand up. Yeah, and Jackie. Errol?
The physical texts where this was written, where are they? I know Josephus is mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls with regard to the Masada period. So where, when we say this was all written, where would the scholars find this stuff?
Oh, well, no, this stuff was written down and preserved soon after, when Tacitus was still alive. These are not rare documents. Tacitus's histories became very, very significant in the succeeding centuries. He's one of the giants. This was not something they were written down. I mean, what archives they were in, the Flavian archives. But, I don't know the history of all the I can't answer the history. But the fact is, this is big time stuff. That's why I say compared to Appian, if it weren't for Josephus, we probably would never have heard of him. I mean, he's mentioned incidentally in some stuff, but, Josephus was the one who put Appian on the map. Okay? All right? But you've got to understand, this is a huge, multi-volume history. And it's not something that, gets forgotten. All right? This is the equivalent. I mean, trying to think, think of the great historians of the 20th century. This guy's in the same category. From the Jewish perspective, I think of, one second. No, my memory, it'll pop up in 10 minutes and I'll tell you. The guy I'm thinking of. There was in the 1960s and 70s, a Jewish historian here in the States wrote a multi-volume history of the Jews and bringing in new perspectives. Okay, and then of course there was the Gretz history of the Jews, but that's going back to the 19th century. That was a breakthrough kind of a thing. So there are great historians whose works are, carried forth over the generations because of the quantity and quality of it. So this is big time stuff. Okay. All right. Now, who else? Wait, Jackie, you had your hand up.
You answered my question, I think, which is basically that it disseminated to the point where, like, the people that were going to become Christian, they read it. You're saying this influenced, this was out there, this was influencing people in the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, in certain respects, yes. I mean, when we deal with the church fathers, with the Origin in particular, I don't know if he read Tacitus or not. Okay, and his writings are on it. He deals, as you'll see, with other issues. Okay, it's much more theological and philosophical.
And the original papers of these people, of course, they're gone. You're saying it was copied by other people. That's how we have it, correct?
Oh, I do not know if the original pages that Tacitus wrote still exist. I can't answer that question.
Okay, thanks.
I haven't looked into it. I mean, you can look it up. Tacitus histories, the history of the history.
Yeah, it's like the archaeological sort of angle.
The thing is, these things made their way into libraries. But again, there were times when I'm thinking of the 6th century of the Common Era, when you have Roman Caesars who are Christians going through books and statues and buildings and tearing and burning to cleanse the empire of its pagan background. Okay? And so a lot of things were destroyed by these powerful kings, and in both ways, and all kinds of different ways for different reasons. That's always happens that way. The notion of preserving documents because of their value depends upon who's evaluating the documents, right? So, it's ironic, just as a little aside, the Christian Hebraists of the 16th and 17th century in Europe, I'm talking monks, studied Hebrew. And there's a whole history of Christian interest in the Hebrew scriptures. Okay, because they wanted to go back. These are intellectuals. They wanted to go back to the original and learn it. So you have moments in time, and there were schools of thought, educational schools going on in Spain, for example, from the 13th century, where they were studying Talmud and Midrash. Monks were reading rabbinic sources in the original, okay, because they wanted to use that to influence the Jews to become Christian, use their own stuff against them. All right, it didn't work, but the fact is they were doing those kinds of things. All right, so there was a resurgence of that in the 16th and 17th centuries, and the irony of the whole thing is the compilation of Jewish anti-Christian stuff, which is just as disgusting as some of this. Okay, the Toldot Yeshu HaNotzri. Did you ever hear of what I just said? The Toldot Yeshu HaNotzri.
Yes.
The history of Jesus, the Nazarene. Okay, it is an anti-history of the Gospels. It was put together possibly 5th, 6th century. That's when it began to appear in different forms. It went big time, of course, during the Middle Ages, but it recurred. Now, the point I'm making, though, is in preservation of these documents. It was in the libraries, the monastic libraries of these monks, that in the 19th century, late 19th, early 20th century, scholars found all these copies, these versions of the Toldot Yeshu in Hebrew that these guys were studying. Now, it's interesting. You don't hear much in the Christian literature of that time of these texts. All right. I mean, having studied it, it was not on page one. The tensions within the different groups of Christians, especially with the rise of Protestantism, right? Those kinds of discussions just overwhelmed the negativity of these Jewish sources. So you don't see echoes of them that much. Okay? But they're there. So my point is, libraries at times can be burned down. Libraries at times preserve. So, I don't know the history of the Tacitus texts. All right, that's something you look it up on Wikipedia. I'm sure you'll get a whole thing of it. Somebody want to do it, and you can come back and make a report. But frankly, I want to move on. All right. So this is Tacitus. All right. So Tacitus, before we get to the part that we're going to read, all right, which begins with 3:1. He talks about these people, the fact that the he refers to it. I'm about to describe the last days of a famous city. And so therefore I should give the Jews the honor of talking about where they came from. And he has these little accounts. They come from here. There's a place on Crete where there's inhabitants called Idae. So Judea, Idae, Judea, right? He says maybe they came from there. Maybe they were Assyrian refugees. Others say that they were of illustrious origin, being the Solamai, a people celebrated in Homer's poems, who founded a city and gave it the name Hierosolima, Jerusalem, from their own. So you see, he says some very dignified, maybe they have dignified roots. All right. Let's not blow that out of proportion. Okay, because he's going to come back to some of this stuff in a minute later on with a different tone. All right. Now we're going to go into Tacitus. 3:1. May I invite someone to read, please?
Rabbi, I've lost the page. Where are we?
All right. No, we are. This is another one of the. Oh wait, hold on. No. This is a. I will give you. I got to go to the other stack.
I think it's
part page 7.
Yes, and at the top,
page 7 in the packet number 1 that I sent you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm using another page where I have notes on it from before, so that's why yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Who wants to read?
I can read now that it's back straight up because of my neck.
Okay, good.
3:1. Most authors agree that once during a plague in Egypt, which caused bodily disfigurement, King Botchorus approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy, whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport this race into other lands, since it was hateful to the gods.
All right.
So the crowd...
Wait. Bodily disfigurement. Remember the lepers in Manetho's account? Now you see the echo of it. Okay? Now you're talking about transmission of traditions and ideas. So whenever that account was written, 3rd century BCE, 2nd century BCE, whatever, here it pops up, an echo of it in the around the year 100 CE from the pen of a great Roman historian. All right, move on. Go ahead.
So the crowd was searched out and gathered together. Then, being abandoned in the desert, while all others lay idle and weeping, one only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust to themselves, regarding as a guide sent from heaven the one whose assistance should first give them escape from their present distress.
So remember that at the end of that there was this priest called Osarseph, going back to Appian. All right, going back to Appian, Osarseph. And at the end of the day, he changes his name to Moses. All right. So, but now you can see this is an edited version of that right up front. The leader, you see. So basically, what he's saying is, a leader will appear who's an activist, and that person is the person you should follow. Okay, because they were hopeless. They had no hope, and he's saying to them, the gods aren't going to help you. These people aren't going to help you, right? And you can see there's no love lost for these other people. Basically, he's saying, we who are of the bodily disfigured, we got to get together, take care of ourselves. So the gods and the rest of the people, nobody wants us. All right, so that comes from the mouth of Moses. All right, moving on. They agreed.
Yeah, they agreed and then set out on their journey in utter ignorance, but trusting to chance.
Right. And who's going to, of course, end up being their leader? Moses, because he's the activist. Okay, very good. All right, somebody else want to read. Number 2.
Nothing caused them so much distress as scarcity of water, and in fact they'd already fallen exhausted over the plain nigh unto death, when a herd of wild asses moved from their pasturage to a rock that was shaded by a grove of trees. Moses followed them, and conjecturing the truth from the grassy ground, discovered abundant streams of water. This relieved them, and then they marched 6 days continuously, and on the 7th seized a country, expelling the former inhabitants. There they founded a city and dedicated a temple.
Okay. So, who was it that ultimately saves the day? It wasn't Moses. It was the donkeys. The donkeys led to the water. Ring a bell? What did Antiochus, according to Apollonius and Posidonius, what did Antiochus find in the temple?
The ass head, the golden ass head.
The golden ass head is what they're worshiping. Here it is. Wait a minute. It's more's going to come. This is the preview of coming attractions. This will bounce back at us in a minute. Okay, but now you want to, so you see what Appian reported in the name of Apollonius and Posidonius, right? Josephus was aware of it. The idea was floating around the court there. This guy is writing a history. He was part of the court, the Flavian court as well. He picks up on this, and here you have it emerging here. Okay? So you see what you're looking at here is a tradition, a passing on from one to the next of anti-Semitic ideas. And it ends up in the writings of one of the greatest historians of that time. Okay, moving on. All right. Who else wants to? I want to get other people to read. Oh, wait, not finished. So look, so they then march continuously for 6 days, and on the 7th, they seize a country, expel the former inhabitants, right? And then they found a city and dedicate a temple. Okay? All right. So,
although it's a lot shorter than what Moses and the Hebrews walked for 40 years. Somehow kind of reminds me of that.
He is basically taking what happened in the book of Joshua and condensing it all into a short period of time under the leadership of Moses, which means out the former inhabitants, right? That's what the Israelites did, presumably did, according, you interpret the Bible a certain way. I mean, look, the truth is, if you read the Bible carefully, they didn't succeed in that. Because all those, if you took the Amos class with me last night, all those other nations continued to operate. The Canaanites themselves, no, but it wasn't just the Israelites who got rid of the Canaanites. Okay, anyhow, the real history is not reflected here. But so now, what do you see here? 6 days shall you work, and on the 7th day you shall not. Because what are you celebrating on the 7th day?
Shabbat.
No, you're celebrating the expulsion of the people from these other nations from the land, according to Tacitus. So the Shabbat, the day when they don't work, ultimately has its foundation in a misanthropic act on the part of these disfigured people. It's a sign that they don't like other people, and they celebrate that every week. All right. I mean, this is a twisting around, of course, of biblical traditions. There's no evidence that Tacitus ever opened the Bible. Okay. He probably didn't. But the sources he was working with, this is what they were telling him. Bernie.
Yeah, I came late. I'm sorry. How does Tacitus relate to Josephus in terms of time and thought? And
we dealt with that just before you tuned in.
All right. I can listen online. I know it's recorded.
All right. Yeah. Josephus wrote his Agapian in 94 CE. This was written 10 years later. So Josephus did not know Appian had written, or these bogus, the bogus history of anti-Semitism would be flowing into Tacitus. Okay, and we don't know. Both of them were part of the same court. Both of them were under the protection or worked for the Flavian dynasty. But Josephus died probably before this was written. And we don't know.
Why did Tacitus have this anti-Semitic bias? I mean, was there anything about the empire that was threatened to them other than a new god? Or
well, he has his biases. He's a human being. You know, I don't know why he developed this. I mean, he glommed onto clearly the sources that we've been studying who preceded him, and this was floating around. And you've got to realize that by that time, the whole notion of the revolt against Rome was bad PR for the Jews. Obviously, this precedes the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? That hasn't happened yet. That was even worse. Okay, what the spin-off from that was worse. But you've got to realize that, by the way, this history was written about 104, 115 to 117. There's the Jews in North Africa revolt, and they get schmeiced up there. But it was a war going on up there for 2 years, and these were zealots who apparently escaped the Hadrianic persecutions. No, this is preceding Hadrian. I'm sorry. This was zealots who escaped the destruction of Jerusalem, ended up in North Africa. They didn't like what was going on over there and how the Jews were treated, so they exploded. And then 17 years later, 12 years, 15 years later, the Bar Kokhba revolt. So you have in the Greco-Roman world, 66, 70, 115, 117, 132 to 135. 3 revolts within a period of 65 years. The same people are revolting. Okay? And so what's the opinion that the Roman world is getting of the Jew? Right? If you wish. Right? 3 times in 65 years. So, that's one of the spin-offs. Okay? And this is in the middle. This is after the first one, before the second and third. Okay. All right. So, okay. Number 4, section 4, verse chapter line 1, to establish. Somebody read, please. No.
I can read.
Okay.
To establish his influence over the people for all time, Moses introduced new religious practices quite opposed to those of other religions. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor.
They're an anti-people, right? I mean, everything else that the world holds to be sacred and of significance, the Jews hold the opposite. Okay?
They dedicated in a shrine a statue of that creature whose guidance enabled them to put an end to their wandering and thirst, sacrificing a ram, apparently in derision of Amnon.
All right, so hold on. Now we know what was in they said they dedicated the temple. What was in that temple?
A shofar.
No.
No?
Statue of that creature whose guidance enabled them to put an end to their wandering and thirst.
Well, the ram? I mean, I don't know.
The golden donkey.
Okay.
The donkey. Who helped them find the water?
The donkey.
Who was their savior?
The donkey.
The donkey. And so that's golden, the remember what we just read before, what Posidonius, and that story that Appian carries forward that Josephus refers to. What was in the temple that Antiochus found? A golden image of a donkey.
But they sprinkle some truth in it, because I have a different version on the Gutenberg where they say they hate our gods, they have the one God. I've read this version. They go on to say that. So they're sprinkled some things that are true about Jews. That's correct?
What was true about Jews?
Well, like here it says, here, let me just find it. They have introduced circumcision to distinguish themselves from other people. Those who are converted to their customs adopt the same practice, but the first lessons they learn are to despise the gods, lower G, G-O-D-S.
Yeah.
So that's true.
But I think some of that's coming up in the next paragraph.
What are you reading? The Gutenberg version of what?
Yeah. I don't have your version. It disappeared. So I went online and I found the Gutenberg. It's similar to what?
Gutenberg version of Tacitus?
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, that's what you're reading. Okay. Yes. All right. Yeah.
And that they don't like pigs, but they twist things. But I'm saying, to me, it
that's
just
coming
seems
up.
Wait, we'll get there. Hold on.
Okay.
It's here. Just right away. Yeah. All right. So, So there's your donkey, folks. Ends up in the writings of one of the world's great historians. Okay, continuing on. Who was reading?
Me. They likewise offer the ox because the Egyptians worshipped Apis.
Apis is an ox, right?
Apis is what?
These are Egyptian gods. Ammon, Apis. In other words, the animals that represent those gods, an ox and a ram, are the animals that the Jews use to sacrifice to the donkey. So in total disregard to the sanctity of those animals in the eyes of the Egyptians, right? Okay. And I mean, in a sense, there is an echo of that in the Hebrew Bible. Because when Jacob goes and working with Joseph, they get the land of Goshen up north because they are shepherds, right? And the Egyptians didn't like shepherds, people who eat the sheep, because they worship that kind of an animal.
Oh, okay.
It's also because the shepherds were the group of people who ruled Egypt for 150 years. That doesn't fit with the Exodus, with the generation of the Exodus. Okay, but I mean, the point is, they were hated. All right, so the notion that the desire to remain separated from these other people was something that you find in the Torah. But in a sense, it was not only for the purpose of the Jews being able to do what they needed, the Israelites, to raise sheep, because that's what they did, but it was out of deference, according to what Joseph says, to Pharaoh, out of deference to your people who don't like shepherds and sheep, the people who eat sheep. So this notion of separation, dealing with their sacrificial needs and or their food needs, etc., it's in the Torah in a completely different light. But these people are taking these things, reinterpreting them, and showing what we've already seen, that the Jews separate themselves from all other people. They are disregarding the other people, which is an insult. That's the point. All right, Tybal.
I'm guessing that it isn't an echo of the Torah talking about animal sacrifices, because animal sacrifices, I assume in the ancient world, almost every culture did it.
Yeah, of course. But the point is, they're taking this and using it. That's the whole point. Oxen and sheep and goats, of course, were part of everybody's worship, except for the Egyptians. I mean, it's like the sacred cows in India, right? You still have those things, right? They don't eat cows in
Nope, right, that's correct.
Yeah. So it's the same notion. So that was the Egyptians theoretically had that same perspective. And yet in spite of that, and the Egyptians, Lord knows the Egyptians were powerful contributors to world culture. The Romans understood that. They knew that very well. They controlled Egypt. They knew about the pyramids and all that stuff. Very impressive stuff. So they're using international knowledge of what the Egyptian culture and religion represent. And they are saying the Jews, Dafka, are using those animals to dig into the Egyptians to show them how much they don't like them. That's the point. Jews don't like other people. Okay? Now, moving on. Go ahead. This is a real ditty right here. They abstain.
They abstain from pork in recollection of a plague, for the scab to which this animal is subject once afflicted them.
Remember now, so these are the deformed, the bodily disfigured people in Egypt, right? Who had a scabbing of their flesh, and that's like the lepers who we learned about with Manetho. So the whole concept of the lepers pops up again. I mean, that's what's going on here. And this is Tacitus. I keep repeating that because you should appreciate the impact of this. It's like the Encyclopedia Britannica was publishing something like this. If it's in the Britannica, of course it's right. Okay, so that's a good analogy, actually. All right. Okay, continue on. Go ahead, Bernie.
By frequent fast, even now they bear witness to the long hunger with which they were once distressed, and the unleavened Jewish bread is still employed in memory of the haste with which they seized the grain.
Right, the haste with which they seized the grain, right? When they moved into the city and kicked out into the country and kicked out all those other people. All right, so this is a new twist on that. So we eat matzah at Pesach time, not because of the haste with which we left, but because of it was a celebration of the food that we got when we conquered the country where we settled and built a temple to the donkey. Okay?
They say that they first chose to rest on the seventh day because they ended their toils, but after a time they were led by the charms of indolence to give over the seventh year as well to inactivity.
Right. So laziness, and they begin here, this whole notion of super lazy. This was a very popular belief in the Greco-Roman world because everybody works 7 days. The only people who take off a day are the Jews. It's the seventh day, right? Why do they take off the day? Well, because they're lazy. If they were really energetic and committed people to work and labor, they would be working all the days. The horror of it all, once in 7 years, right? They don't even farm. Shemitah, the land, right? It says in the Bible, the land shall be given its Sabbath. Yes? Because they're so lazy, they take off a whole year. No, nobody in the world does this. What a weird people, all full of negative tendencies. Okay? Barbara.
It kind of amazes me that these scholars that write this sort of stuff or wrote this sort of stuff never read the Torah or never paid attention to the Torah, had no knowledge of it.
Well, they are depending upon other people who claim to have done that, or whom the tradition was that they did it or whatever. I mean, remember, there were people around, and we cannot, I don't know if we're doing basically drawing a trail here, all right? But, yes, I don't know that Tacitus ever opened up and read the Septuagint. It would seem to me that he did not.
Yeah.
Because but there were people who had done this before. I mean, that's where this whole thing with Manetho comes into play. Whoever was Manetho, whether he was a priest, an Egyptian priest, some other guy, whatever that was, clearly read the Hebrew Bible in the Greek, right? Learned about these things, did not like the Jews because they were foreigners in his country, because they were getting privilege in his country, which was a fact that developed over the course of the end of the 3rd century into the 2nd century BCE. That really happened. Okay? So the point being that eventually these rabid religious nationalists were getting very bothered by the fact that this alien people is making inroads into the leadership of the country. That was their image. They will take over. That was their concern. And so all of this garbage comes around. They take the biblical stuff. They could say, read their Bible. You're going to see. This is what you're going to find. And so so people, what you have generations later, they're not looking at the Greek Bible anymore. They're looking to the sources that claim to have looked. All right, you're right. They would have had they opened it up, they would have seen. On the other hand, they could have opened it up, seen what was written there, okay, and interpreted it with their minds already refocused to read those things in that way. The donkey thing clearly is off the wall. I mean, that for sure, right? And you're going to find in the Bible, there shall be no images of anything, right? It's in the 10 Commandments, for goodness sake. So, but on the other hand, and I don't know the degree to which when the book of Kings, well, no, remember the golden calf, right? The golden calf. The golden calf takes place in the desert, right? They're at Mount Sinai, right? Their leader was gone, right? So they were panicking. Out comes this golden calf. And the people say, this is your God, Israel, who took you out of Egypt. So you have that in the back of your head. No, it wasn't the calf. It was a donkey.
Okay.
Okay, so you can see the roots of that concept. It's a demeaning even of the golden calf or the golden young bull, which was an accepted image throughout the Middle East of a god, right? But no, because they eat that, right? They eat bulls. It says so right here, right? They eat a bull, which represented the god Ammon or whatever, whoever it was. No, that was the ram. Apis. Oh, yeah, Apis, of course. Apis, the bull. So they eat those. All right, anyhow. But you can see how these biblical notions can be twisted around, and out comes this. Okay, somebody else read, please. Number 4. Others say.
I can read again.
Go ahead.
The others say that this is done in honor of Saturn, whether it be that the primitive elements of their religion were given by the Idaeans, who, whether according to tradition, were expelled with Saturn and became the founders of the Jewish race.
See, that's something. Wait, stop. Remember, I mentioned this before, the people on Crete that he referred to in his introduction to the Jews, to this whole thing about the Jews. All right, so now read on. Go ahead. You'll see why this is interesting. Go ahead.
Or is due to the fact that of the 7 planets that rule the fortunes of mankind, Saturn moves in the highest orbit, has the greatest potency, and that many of the heavenly bodies traverse their paths and courses in multiples of 7.
All right, so now we're getting away from the worshiping of the donkey, at least. So you can say, oh, this is a noble statement now that the Jews, the 7 doesn't come from any exploitation of people, kicking them out of the land, etc. It has to be. This is more real. This is much more. This form of worship would bring them closer into what the family of nations in that world would be doing. All right, so that's where the 7 comes from, Saturn. All right, and so when you're worshiping Saturn, so you on the Sabbath day, you rest. The seventh day, the 7th planet, whatever. Okay, all right. So that's a nice thing for him to say, but it's rather hollow after all the other stuff that preceded it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Whatever their origin, these rites are maintained by their antiquity. The other customs of the Jews are base and abominable, and owe their persistence to their depravity.
All right, so stop right there. All right, so these rites, in other words, he's saying maybe we don't know for sure how the Jews got to their rites, okay? But there are other things that define Jewish life that are base and abominable, and they owe their persistence to their depravity. They are a depraved people. All right, they've got no value. It's hollow. If anything, it's bad. Okay. All right.
Or the worst rascals among other peoples, renouncing their ancestral religions, always kept sending tribute and contributing to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of the Jews. Again, the Jews are extremely loyal toward one another and always ready to show compassion. But toward every other people, they feel only hate and enmity.
All right, so the Jews, even if they leave, right, they continue sending money to Jerusalem. The Jews get wealthy, right? They're loyal to one another, but hate everybody else. Okay, and it was a fact that Jews around the world would send money to the temple in Jerusalem when it was in existence. They did, yes. All right.
Well, Jews today send money to organizations that are in their hometowns often.
No, it's not the same. All right. Thank you, Barbara. Number 2, somebody else, please read.
They sit apart at meals and they sleep apart. And although as a race they are prone to lust, they abstain from intercourse with foreign women, yet among themselves nothing is unlawful. They adopted circumcision to distinguish themselves from other people by this difference. Those who are converted to their ways follow the same practice, and the earliest lesson they receive is to despise the gods, to disown their country, and to regard their parents, children, and brothers as of little account.
Okay, so we're lovely people, right? We abstain from intercourse with foreign women, right? But on the other hand, among themselves, nothing is unlawful. All right, so we can cater to our most base tendencies, right? And that's what we are. And he mentions the fact that there are people who do convert. Now, by this time, generally speaking, conversion out of the Roman Empire was seen as a no-no. But it was only, if I'm not mistaken, after the Bar Kokhba revolt that conversion became actually a capital crime for Jews. Okay, so at this point, still there were instances of conversion. It doesn't seem to have been a major source of growing the Jewish people, however. Especially after being known as a people who rebel. And I want to remind you, I mentioned the 3 rebellions under the Romans, right? You already have here a reference. I mean, in Posidonius Apollonius stuff, they go back to where? Antiochus, right? 2nd century BCE. And the Jews did a revolt there too. So, I mean, again, going back to this notion, the Jews were not, being Jewish in some instances was very attractive. And we're going to see that when we get to the last of the later down in the packet on Christianity. We'll see that. But the point is that the notion about circumcision, that was a big deal because the Romans considered that to be a form of mutilation of the body. It was anathema to Romans. And that's a big deal, by the way. You can see that. Read the book of Acts. The whole notion of Jesus's followers, there's a whole argument between, should people who become Christian, who come to believe in Jesus, be circumcised or not. And there was an element in that early generation, the first generation after Jesus, Jewish Christians, in other words, Jews who believed Jesus was the Messiah, all right? They were talking about conversion, about circumcision. If you want to become a Jew, you got a Christian who believes in Jesus, you got to circumcise. They were outvoted. And of course, Paul picks up on that, and the notion of what circumcision represents is going to be interpreted differently. Okay? So anyhow, these are some of the ideas that are floating around at that time. All right, Errol, do you want to continue?
However, they take thought to increase their numbers, for they regard it as a crime to kill any late-born child, and they believe that the souls of those who are killed in battle or by the executioner are immortal. Hence comes their passion for begetting children and their scorn of death.
Right.
They bury the...
Wait, hold on. What he's referring here is this is known, that if a family had the late born child. In other words, if they had a child and they already had kids and they didn't like the fact that they got pregnant and had a child, right? They would leave, you read about them leaving the children exposed. The exposure of newborn children was a common practice in the Roman world. Okay? That's what this is talking about. The Jews, however, no. If there is a child born and the parents are relatively old, keep the kid. Here you see, in the context of that culture, it's turned against us. Bad thing. Shouldn't burden the family of older parents with another child. So kill them, let them expose them outside. And literally, they would put them in a basket, put them outside, expose them to the elements, and the kids would die. And nobody would pick them up, etc. The Jews, however, life is precious. Their life is precious. The lives of their people are precious. All right? And yes, we believe in life after death. Absolutely. That was a principle, but we know that that was not universal at that time in the Jewish community. The leftovers of the Sadducees, the Tzaddukim, the people who were supportive of the Zadokite priesthood, they did not believe in Olam Haba. Josephus reports on that. The Essenes and the Pharisees believed in the world to come. The Sadducees did not. All right. So even in the Jewish world, that wasn't yet totally universal. By the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt and thereafter, I would say it probably was. And even at this point in time, to be sure, yes, the majority of Jews believed in the world to come at the time that Tacitus is writing this. Margaret.
I know you've been talking about the belief in the afterlife, but I don't understand how he says they believe that the souls of those who are killed in battle or by the executioner are immortal, and that somehow leads them to what he describes as a scorn of death. I don't understand what he means by, what does he mean, first of all, by their scorn of death?
Wait, where are you? Hold on just a second. Oh, I'm sorry, but just a minute. Their scorn of death. Oh, no, they're not afraid to die.
Ah, okay, gotcha. Okay. That was a simple explanation. Okay, thanks.
Afraid to die.
Yeah, in this version, it says, thus they think much of having children and nothing of facing death, which makes me feel like it's the martyr thing and that's wonderful, right? That we praise our martyrs. They're not, that's what makes, I think of that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, in a sense, that's true. Okay. Errol, you reading?
They bury the body rather than burn it, thus following the Egyptians' custom. They likewise bestow the same care on the dead and hold the same belief about the world below, but their ideas of heavenly things are quite the opposite.
Okay. Oh, hold on. Now here you could say this is not something that is a bad thing, right? Because he's saying the Jews have adapted this Egyptian concept of burying the body, right? Okay, and the belief in a world below. That's biblical, right? That's Sheol in the Bible. That Hebrew word is the afterlife. It is not the same as Olam Haba. It's not really living, but you mean you go down, when you're buried in the ground, that's where you stay. All right? This is not a concept of ascent into heaven.
The word is? The Hebrew word you mentioned?
Sheol. Shin, Aleph Vav Lamed, Sheol, S-H-E, Sheol, O-L, Sheol. Jacob, when he believes that Joseph has died, he says, I will go down to Sheol grieving, because he thought he was going to die. Okay, that's what Jacob says. Okay, so he's making a statement here. There are elements of what the Jews do that have their parallels in the rest of the world. Okay, and you could say, excuse me, that there was a kind of a left-handed compliment here, because it's saying, well, they got that from, in other words, they didn't invent this idea. They got it from the Egyptians. Okay, they got it from the Egyptians. All right. But now the next thing is very interesting. Continue, please.
The Egyptians worship many animals and monstrous images. The Jews conceive of one God only, and that with the mind only. They regard as impious those who make from perishable materials representation of gods in man's image. That supreme and eternal being is to them incapable of representation and without end.
All right, so this is hold on. This is a statement of Jewish monotheism. All right. There's no sense of denigration here. In fact, it is possible that this is a little bit of the respect that people see that has been woven in to some of the things that Tacitus teaches. The question is, and so it's a sophisticated thing. Tacitus, was schooled in philosophy and things like that. So this moves into that realm of higher beings that are non-material. Okay, so this is a kind of a compliment. And, no images, nothing. Okay, therefore, finish up.
Therefore, they set up no statues in their cities, still less in their kings, nor this honor given to the Caesars.
All right, so it says, still less in their temples. All right, so they don't have any images in their temples. But wait a second. That's a contradiction. What did we read earlier in Tacitus? They built a temple, and what did they put inside? A golden donkey. So how can he say on the one hand that they had a golden donkey, and the other hand say that they don't put in any images? He contradicts himself. Not a good thing if you're a historian, right? He needed a proofreading here. Somebody should have said to him, hey, Tacitus, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth here. So I don't understand that. All right. By the way, I don't write commentaries on Tacitus. That's something I don't write commentaries on. I write commentaries on Bible, yeah, but I don't write commentaries on Tacitus. All right. We're done on this thing with this right now. All right. So you can see, I guess, the main point. Well, you don't have to tell me. You see it for yourself. You have here a tradition of wild anti-Semitic ideas that pass down midor lador from one generation to the next. And it became embedded in elements of Greco-Roman, their world outlook. And as I say, the fact that all these wars took place didn't do anything to pour cold water on these very, very nasty ideas. And ultimately, in certain ways, the attitude that they're developing toward Jews will spill over into the emerging Christian world. However, as we will see when we read the next, we're going to start. We're finishing now. When you use the next session, we will devote ourselves to reading from the Christian Bible, and then reading two of the fathers of the church, if you want to call them that, whatever. Origen, who lived around the year 200, and then John Chrysostom, who lived around 380. Okay? And these are people, we'll talk about, give you brief, I'm spending my little bit of a biographical discussion of, not long, but a summary of Origen is actually longer than what I'm going to tell you about John Chrysostom, because the fact is Origen is a powerful voice in the evolution of Christian thinking in those early centuries. And he has a connection to Judaism, very interesting connection to Judaism. We will talk about that. Chrysostom is something, as they say in Hebrew, zesus mitzeva acher. This is a horse of a different color. He's got a different agenda. His perspective is totally different. But these are all coming more out of their interpretation of the Bible than they are based upon this pagan anti-Semitism. It's different. It's a whole new approach. And of course, on the one hand, that's nice, because that's a lot of nasty stuff here. On the other hand, they develop their own approach, which ends up being just as lethal. That's the problem. Okay? And they're dealing with pagans who may have been exposed to this approach. And the question is, and I have not looked into this from a scholarly perspective, the degree to which you can see echoes of this kind of stuff in the Christian-based anti-Jewish stuff. I don't know. I'd have to look for it. I just haven't done that research. I'll see if I can get some. The influence of Greco-Roman anti-Semitism on early Christian anti-Semitism. Okay, I can look that up and see if somebody's written on that, because that would be very interesting to see.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.